Hey there, friends. So I have a deck walkthrough to do with you. And this is not a deck that I'd heard of before. A friend of mine who is recently getting into tarot sent me a picture of this deck and said, I've been thinking about getting this and sort of getting back into tarot again. What do you think? And I said, that looks great. And of course, I had to go out and buy it. So this is Tarot of Plants by Heather Enders. And this is a deck that I got on Etsy, but you can find it at www.emptyandamazing.com. So the deck itself comes separately. There is a guidebook, which I actually would recommend getting with an asterisk, with a caveat. So the caveat is this: the artist who made the tarot notes in the book that she didn't have a super huge relationship with tarot to start with, but she always wanted to design a deck. So when she finally decided to do that, she sat down with the Wild Unknown deck and guidebook, and also Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. Now, this is an old book. Let's see if this is the second edition, I think, and I've had this probably for 15 years, if not more. So the second edition was first printed in 2002. Yeah, 1985 is when Scott Cunningham originally published this. Scott Cunningham is kind of a well-known author of kind of earth religion, so he's most famous for this book, Wicca: A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, and then its follow-up, Living Wicca. These are really, these are pretty famous, and I definitely sort of poured over these books in my youth. He's a really good writer. I don't necessarily classify myself as Wicca, or I've talked about this before. I don't have a particular spiritual path, but what I do have is a salad that I've made for myself out of old earth based religions. Scott Cunningham in particular, I found his writing really simple and beautiful. Another writer that I found really simple and beautiful was Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a famous Buddhist writer. Pema Chodron is another one, a Buddhist writer. Both have influenced me. And then there's things from the religion of my youth, and just I've kind of gathered all these things and shaped a worldview based on them. But they're ultimately not any one path. But that's sort of a digression. So the reason that I bring this up is that she used this book as inspiration for the deck in partnership with meanings she sort of detected from the Wild Unknown, and I would say Rider-Waite-Smith. The meanings of the cards and the suits have a very Rider-Waite-Smith kind of flow to them. So what I thought I would do is actually pull out this old book, and compare, which I haven't done yet. This is not an unboxing. I've looked at this deck. I did read the guidebook. Because I don't have a huge memory for the details of plants, I wanted to read the guidebook to get a sense of what it said. So, and then look at the cards in conjunction with that, and then kind of compare what the guidebook says with what Cunningham says. Not for everything, but for a handful of things. The other thing I would say is that I think you do need some kind of guidebook or reference book to go with this. If you have this already, you may not necessarily feel like you need to buy the guidebook. It is a little bit extra. The deck itself, I think, is about $40, and then the book, I think, is about $7 or $8, if I'm not mistaken. So like most indie decks, it's not inexpensive. But I think the guidebook, gives you I think for the most part, the guidebook does a good job of tying the plant energy into the meaning of the card. but I will say that you really have to be on board with the system and the choices. Now, if you like the art, of course, and you're sort of versed enough in tarot that you have a system of your own, I don't think the images of the plants are intrusive to the point where you can't use your own system along with it, and then add color and shading with the plants. And I will say this too, as a preamble, it's really balanced. You know, one of the things that I've been finding is I've been looking for plant decks, which is something I've been on the prowl for. So if you have recommendations, let me know, because I haven't found a lot that are super balanced, and that's kind of my thing with oracles in particular, but of course tarot. Most of the decks that I have found that are plant based are pretty affirmational. I have a deck coming that I bought anyway, and I'll do a walkthrough. I have a couple Oracle decks I want to do a walkthrough of, but I'm waiting for this one to come in. Should be this week at some point. But I think that I got it because I feel like I could work with the affirmation as like a deficit or a deposit. So you have this in your life right now, or you need this in your life right now. So I liked the art enough and the keywords enough to say, okay, this I can make balanced. But for the most part, I found anything that's sort of herbal so far to be pretty affirmational. This is not just that. There is shadow in this deck, which I think is worthwhile. So what I thought I would do is just sort of give you a little insight into this. I'll do a walkthrough, but I won't read everything for everything. It's an interesting thing when tarot decks are not created by people who read tarot, because I just think it offers a unique perspective from the outside that can be good, and it can be frustrating if you already have a system. There are a couple cards in this deck where I feel like, oh, that was a missed opportunity because this other herb or plant or tree would have more encapsulated my view. But that's my view, right? So one of the nice things about the number of decks we have out there is how many views there are to work with and explore. So I think that, I try to remember that. So the deck itself comes in this nice this nice box, super sturdy, very indie deck. There was an earlier edition of this that was, the colors were inverted, so the backs were, the cards themselves were white and the art was black, much like the book. But I believe that's out of print, and all that's available now is this, which I like. I sort of kind of wanted the brightness of it, but I'm happy with the inverted colors. The book itself is decent. It's 111 pages. It's very much like, you can see the influence of the Wild Unknown here. The definitions are very terse. There's no reversed meanings, but they are, you do get a sense of not necessarily why the artist chose what she chose, but the connection of the plant to the card meaning, which to me is thoughtful. And it's something that I always wished the Wild Unknown Guidebook gave us. I'm always super curious to know why Kim Kranz chose what she chose. I think the guidebook is fine. I didn't really need it, but what I was hoping for was, I chose this pattern out of this impulse or this suggested meaning. So, but anyway, the guidebook is really nicely done, and it's very sturdy. It's essentially a little white book in a more glamorous form, given the amount of information. But she does, she goes through all the cards. Each card gets about a page. And then there's some spreads and reading suggestions in the back, and then a little bit about the deck. So again, I would likely recommend getting this book if you don't have the Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. I'm not sure that the Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs is going to solve everything, because I don't know how much came from here and how much didn't. So we'll find out. But so I think unless you have like a really horticultural background. Is that horticulture is plants? I can't remember. You may want something. So I'm going to zoom in on the deck, and I find lately, not even lately, over the years, because the way I make videos, I don't sit behind the tripod, I sit next to it. I accidentally tend to orient the cards to me and not the video, so I'm trying to be more conscious of that. Because when I looked at the video I did on Santa Muerta Tarot and the other decks, it sort of everything was crooked. So if you don't buy the guidebook, there are a couple cards that sort of give you a sense of the suits and the energies, the symbols. There is some astrological associations and some elemental associations, and she gives you like a little key, and then also the reassignation of the suits. So the suits in this deck are spring for wands, summer for cups, fall for pentacles, and winter for swords. So that's another thing to know as you consider this deck, is that the suit assignations are specific to seasons. So the names of the suits are the seasons. And if you're, I don't assign the suits necessarily to seasons. It's just not a thing I do. But if you do, this may not line up. So that's something worth knowing. But I don't know that the cards are so energetically of their season that you couldn't switch the court, not the court, the suit of tarot with, like, if you prefer the suit of winter to be wands, I think, if you're not super, dedicated to doing, what the deck says, then I think you could reverse things or move things around if you wanted to. Assuming that you can connect the plant energy to the suit that you want to assign it with. The cards do have little elemental and astrological associations on them too. Again, I don't assign each individual card to an element, and I have no astrological associations in my reading anyway. So I don't find this obtrusive, but you may. So just to sort of keep that in mind. So what I want to do is just read a couple descriptions. I'm going to show you the cards, read a couple descriptions from the guidebook, and see, what Cunningham says about them too, just to compare, and I'll talk through. So you can see that it's very simple, subtle art, which I really quite like. The backs are this nice plant sort of, vine. So we'll start with let me start with the first. The first one is the Fool, and it's dandelion, and I kind of see that because of the way, if you have seen dandelions, once they become these fuzzy, white puffs, the wind blows and they scatter, and I think that that's sort of an interesting example of the Fool energy. So the first one that interested me was that the magician was grass. So I'll read you what she says in the book and then see what, if anything, Cunningham says about grass. Let's see. So she says here the keyword. So just to sort of go back to the book, you get keywords and then a description. So she puts expansive energy, action, embrace your abilities. Grass spreads out all around us, from the great plains to homeowners' well-manicured lawns. This network of blades is able to cover as much territory as it can. A true master of resources and action, it provides a little bit of energy, or it proves a little bit of energy can go a long way. So that's what she says in the guidebook. Let me see if Cunningham says anything. This book is huge, and I don't know if there's like an index by, I may just have to go, let's see. So here we have Emma M. Grass. All right. So he says grass, psychic powers, protection, magical uses. Suspend a ball of green grass in the front window of a home to drive out evil and to protect it. Tie knots in grass around the home for the same purpose. Blades of grass carried help psychic powers. Use green grass to mark a wish on a stone, or simply rub the grass against it to make a greenish spot. Visualize your need and then bury the stone or throw it into running water. So I don't see a whole lot of connection between what she chose and what Cunningham has to say about it. So clearly there isn't like a direct correlation. In terms of seeing the magician's energy in this, Cunningham gives me a little bit of a sense of manifesting things, you know, but it's not like the connection isn't super strong. So where he talks about using green grass to mark a wish on a stone or rub it against the stone to make a spot to visualize your need and then bury the stone. Like there's a thing in that action or that connection of manifesting or making things happen. So I can kind of see it. Grass is interesting to me as the magician because I find, what we know ecologically about grass is that it's actually invasive and that a lot of creatures can't live in it or on it. So, like, beautifully manicured lawns are actually bad for the environment. So, in terms of the magician, the correlation to me is not ideal. In fact, grass itself is very high maintenance. To have beautifully manicured lawn involves a lot of chemicals. So there's something there that I think, the associations to me throughout the deck are not perfect. What is more important to me, though, is that the author seems to have drawn a connection that makes sense to her. From my point of view, the magician would have been I'm trying to think of what a plant would represent the magician to me, but, gosh. I don't even know. So, see, I couldn't even make this deck. But it would have to be something to me that's powerful and that draws a lot of energy from the outside. So, like, for what I might say for the magician is like a Three Sisters garden would be, because the plants work together to protect each other and draw nutrients and feed each other, and that creates like the energy around the Three Sisters garden. So anyway, that's what I might have done. But again, I didn't make this deck, so I'm just sort of sharing with you my thoughts, my feelings on this. So the High Priestess is called Goto Kola. I'm going to just talk about the first three because they're the most sort of interesting, and then that's a lie. They're not the most interesting. They're the first three I'm going to talk about. There may be a couple others that strike me, but the first three were interesting to me. So the High Priestess is Goto Kola, which her keywords are psychic wisdom, intuition, subconscious feminine. And the card description says, Goto Kola connects us to the power within, brings strength to our subconscious, and allows us to connect to deeper parts of our mind. It helps us receive the dark, unconscious power we all possess. And so let me see what Cunningham says. It would help if I could spell, couldn't it? So what he says here, powers meditation, magical uses, use in meditation, incense, burn a small amount prior to but not during meditation. So he doesn't say a whole lot about it. So it does make me wonder sort of like if her primary sources were the Wild Unknown Guidebook and Cunningham's Magical Herbs, kind of how she drew that connection. So I would like to know more about that in her guidebook. But, again, I do see the meaning of the card in her description of it. I don't necessarily connect it to what Scott Cunningham says in his book, but still interesting. Empress is corn, and this is another one where I immediately felt like corn is an interesting choice, right? Because what we know about corn is that it has zero nutritional value to the human body, right? The body cannot digest most of what corn is. So we really couldn't live off of it. Although, in times of struggle, it has been something that sustained people, but it doesn't necessarily add health. So what I probably would have chosen, when I think of the Empress, I would think of wheat. Because wheat, for all the, negative attention we give it these days, it for most of humanity has sustained and provided nutrition, and even, genetically modified wheat saved cultures or groups in Africa, for example, where the weather wasn't conducive to how wheat grows. Someone came along and cultivated a wheat that could grow in African conditions, and that sustained people. So when I think of like nutrition and when I think of nurturing and fertility, I would choose wheat for the Empress like in a heartbeat over anything else. But here's what the artist says about corn for the Empress. So creation, nature, motherly, feminine. So again, the key words are very traditional. Corn is an invaluable crop, a bringer of life and the goddess of the home. From just a little seed, a rich source of food grows, which gives us life to a multitude of other creatures, humans included. So that is true, and I will sort of wheel myself back a second and say it is true that corn sustains animals that are not human, and it is symbolic of goddesses and cultures. So again, being thoughtful. I don't doubt the author's thoughtfulness here. I'm just sort of sharing like my own. Whenever we get a deck, we sort of want it to reflect our own worldview. It's not going to, and of course, if everything did, then no one would be happy with anything. And it would be impossible. So I'm actually going through this mostly to see the curiosity of like what she said, sort of what inspired her, what Scott Cunningham said to inspire her. So let's see. It may sound like I'm being super hard on this deck. I'm not. I really like it. I don't tend to talk about decks I hate. So corn here. So this I can really see. Corn, folk names, giver of life, maize, sacred mother, seed of seeds, right? So I can see how she would make this connection. The gender is feminine. The planet is Venus. The element is earth. And she has those connections on the card. Powers, protection, luck, divination, ritual uses. The corn mother or goddess is a deity of plenty and of fertility, long worshipped throughout the East and North America. The Zunis utilize different colors of corn in their religious rituals. Blue corn meal is used to bless and is scattered as an offering. Magical uses: reach into a bin of corn, pull out any ear, count the grains. Allow 12 grains of corn for each year, and it will tell you your age. What? Reach into a bin of corn, pull out any ear, count the grains. Allow 12 grains of corn for each year, and it will tell you your age. Interesting. An ear of corn is placed within the cradle to protect the baby against negative forces. A bunch of corn stalks hung over the mirror brings good luck to the household. And a necklace made of dried red corn kernels prevents nosebleed. Pollen from corn was used to make rain by ancient Mesoamerican peoples, probably by tossing it into the air. At one time in the mountains of the United States, if a birth was difficult, red corn cobs were burned on the doorstep of the cabin or even under the bed to speed up the process. So in that case, I really do see the connection strongly. So even though my impulse is to say, oh, obviously the Empress is wheat, looking at Heather Enders and Scott Cunningham, I really see the connection. So I'm not going to do that for all of these. I'll go through, just a couple to show you them. Like the Emperor as a pine tree sort of just instinctively seems to feel good. The Hierophant is Datura. I didn't know what that meant. So again, I feel like having some kind of reference, whether it's Cunningham or whether you get Heather Enders' book, is helpful. But the art is really sort of like, it just reminds me of Japanese brush painting with its simplicity. And I love art that's just sort of like a sketch of something that gives me the energy of the element of the thing. That makes me happy. I also love art, as I always say, where you can feel the hand of the artist at work. And I feel like you get a really sort of nice flow. So here we have Justice as chicory, the Hermit as mushroom, which again sort of makes sense. Not necessarily what I would have thought, but again, there's that sense of sort of living in darkness and being something that produces out of less than perfect, or for most people less than, the perfect conditions. Tumbleweed is the Wheel of Fortune, makes total sense. Here's Chariot as Moline. The Hanged Man is Willow. This does not look like a willow to me, I have to tell you. I thought it was Rosemary. There's another card that's Rosemary, and it looks also like Rosemary, but this didn't sort of sing to me as Rosemary. So it's good that the names are on here. Death is Poppy. Totally see that. Temperance as a cattail. When you read what she says in the book, I'll just read that quickly. Because the definitions are pretty short. The cattail sits between the land and the stillness of a pond, finding the perfect balance between its need for soil and water. Its quiet presence is often overlooked as it integrates perfectly into the landscape. So you get a sense of balance there and moderation between earth and water, which I think is very appropriate. Bindweed as the devil, Pennyroyal as the tower. Again, you can see how, like, unless you have a reference book, you may, be a little bit lost unless unless you just like the art and you don't care what the plants mean. The star is rosemary, the moon as water lily, the sun is sunflower. Judgment as the tulip, I think, is really, again, I sort of thought, oh, interesting choice. But then when I read what she said about it, I said, oh, okay. So the bulbs of the tulip lie under the harsh winter ground. Beneath the snow and icy soil, they wait patiently for the earliest signs of spring. The tulip is forgiving of these conditions and will raise its head up high, but warm weather is not always here to stay. A late snow could follow. Don't jump to conclusions. So you have this idea of tulip waking up to spring and sort of pushing through the conditions that have came before it. And then the world as an apple, I also sort of like a lot because I think that apple again is a symbol. I'm going to look at Cunningham this time and see what he says about apples. But apple has been in a lot of North American cultures sort of symbolic of abundance, I think. What he says, folk names, fruit of the gods, fruit of the underworld, silver branch, the silver bough, tree of love, powers, love, healing, garden magic, ritual uses. August 13th was Diana's festival in Greece, Venus is in Rome, and on this day a ritual meal was prepared, part of which consisted of apples still hanging on their boughs. Wiccan altars are often piled high with apples and Samhain. I've heard Samhain and Samhain. I'm just gonna go with what I what I heard. For the apple is considered to be one of the foods of the dead. For this very reason, Samhain is sometimes known as the Feast of Apples. The apple is a symbol of immortality. He says a lot. A branch of the apple which bore buds, flowers, and fully ripened fruit, sometimes known as the silver bough, was a kind of magical charm which enabled its possessor to enter into the land of the gods, the underworld in Celtic mythology. In the Old English ballad Thomas the Rhymer, the fairy queens warned Thomas against eating any of the apples and pears which hung in her garden, for to eat the food of the dead ensures there will be no return to the world of living, which of course we also recognize from the story of Persephone, although in that case it's a pomegranate. In some Wiccan traditions, the apple is a symbol of the soul, and so they are buried on Samhain or Samhain so that those who will be reborn in the spring will have food during the cold winter months. Magical uses. The apple has long been used in spells of love. The blossoms are added to love sachets, brews, and incenses, and they are infused in melted pink wax, then strained out to make candles suitable for burning, attracting love. A simple apple love spell consists of cutting an apple in half and sharing it with your loved one. This ensures that you will be happy together. A similar spell directs you to hold an apple in your hands until warm, and then give it to your intended. If he or she eats it, your love will be returned. Apples are also used in love divinations, which were popular among unmarried women in Europe for many centuries. Simply cut an apple in two and count the number of seeds. If they are even, marriage will occur. If one of the seeds is cut, it may be a stormy relationship. If two are cut, widowhood is foretold. However, if an uneven number of seeds are found, the woman will remain unmarried in the near future. One last apple love spell. Take an apple before it falls from the tree and write upon it with a sharp knife the following: Alio, Delio, Delato. As you do this, say the following words: I conjure the apple by these names which are written on thee, that what woman or man toucheth and tasteth thee may love me and burn in my love as a fire melteth wax. Then give the apple to whom you will, but be warned, for this, like much love magic, borders on manipulation. For healing, cut an apple into 3 pieces, rub each on the affected part of the body, then bury them. Do this during the waning of the moon to banish illness. To ensure that you do not contract a fever, eat an apple. If you are a gardener, pour apple cider onto freshly turned earth to give it life just before planting. Also pour libations on roots just for tree rituals. And if you grow apples, bury 13 leaves of an apple tree after harvest to ensure a good crop of apples next year. There's so much more. I'm going to stop there. But finally, unicorns live beneath apple trees. Who knew? Apples are notoriously hard to grow, by the way. So anyway, I like that association. So now we get into the suits. The suit of spring is associated with the suit of wands, if I'm not mistaken. See, this is sometimes where I get a little wonky with remembering what's what. Spring. And I know I said this before. Wands. So here we have the seed. The aces are called seeds, which makes total sense to me in this context because I think of aces as seeds. So horsetail. Whoops. I edged these last night before I did this. So 2 of spring is violet. 3 of spring is garlic. Let me just read a couple. I'm going to read a couple of the minors, just to give you a sense of how how the choices are and see if you connect with them. The 3 of spring, support from others, building your future. In the fall, you gather up cloves of garlic and plant them in preparation for spring. Each plant will produce a bulb of many little cloves growing tightly together. It may take an effort and planning to dig them up, but doing so creates more promise for the future. So that's her interpretation of the 3 of wands. Support from others and building your future. Again, that's not congruent with my own system, and it actually doesn't necessarily connect to Rider-Waite-Smith either. So this is, in many ways its own system, but because it is such a simple picture, again, you know what I mean? You could use the meaning of the fruit or the plant to add shading or color or more detail if you want to. The 4 of spring is daisy. We have ground ivy as the... Wait. Did I invert things? Where's the 5? I thought I had these in order. Maybe it's missing. So my other half was looking at this deck, so I'm curious to see if it got moved somewhere. We got the 4 and the 6. Oh, there it is. Thank God. I hate when that happens. I've had so many decks that come missing a card. Not my favorite. So Vetch is something I'd never heard of. Let's see what Scott Cunningham says about that. Vetch. Fidelity. If your loved one has gone astray, rub the root of the giant vetch on your body, then wrap it up in cloth and place it under your pillow. This reminds him or her that you're still around waiting. So again, that's not necessarily a context that I consider in relation to the 5 of wands. What does she say? Vetch is a beautiful weed that sprawls out over the landscape. It climbs over logs, bushes, rocks, grasses, growing in all directions at a quick rate. But beware, this frantic growth often leaves it spread thin and tangled up in any trouble that it comes upon. So you do get a sense of conflict there, which to me is definitely related to 5s. The 6 is daisy. The 7 is ground ivy. The barrel cacti for the 8. Red clover for the 9. Lettuce was an interesting one for the 10, for the 9 rather. But again, I won't read them all. I don't want this to be boring. Thistle for the 10. And then we get into the court cards. The court cards are the same structure. They are daughter, son, mother, and father, which is right out of the Wild Unknown. So they let me read one of the courts to give you a sense of how that goes from her point of view. So what is this? This is the Son of Spring. Daffodil. The keyword is charming. The daffodil is tall and cheery even after that surprise spring snow. Stay confident about yourself. That's not the best example. Let's look at the mother of spring, which is lilac. The keyword is overcomes with grace. Lilac sleeps all winter and then bursts forth with tall combs of flowers, filling the spring air with the most comforting smell. You would hardly know the type of winter she has gone through with the display she puts on. So there is kind of a personality element to her descriptions of the courts, though not sort of super people-y. Father of Spring, Bachelor's Buttons. There's a lot of stuff that's out of order here. Sorry about that. I thought it was in order. Seed of Summer. Yoink. So Seed of Summer, there we have Columbine, Wild Rose for the 2, Lovage for the 3, Desert Sage for the 4, Lily for the 5. This she associates with funerals. So if you think about, I think summer she equates with water. Yes, cups. So, you get a sense of loss with that association, which the 5 of Cups is in the Rider-Waite-Smith system associated with. The 6 of Summer is Lily of the Valley. 7 is Venus Flytrap. 8, Purple Loosestrife. The 9 is Strawberry. The 10 is Tomato. And then the Quartz Daughter of Summer is Maidenhair Fern. The Sun is a Fern. Mother is Kava Kava. And the Father of Summer is Licorice. And then we get into the Seed of Autumn is Cucumber. 2 of Autumn is Maple. 3 of Autumn is Aspen. 4 of Autumn is Potato. 5 is Monkshood. 6 is Gourd. 7 is Chokecherry. 8 is Peppers. I'm sorry, no, that is 9. And then 10 is Zucchini. Daughter is Blueberry. Again, that's very summery to me. So that's an interesting thing. I think of blueberries early in the summer, not necessarily in autumn. Root vegetables, that makes sense. Carrot. Lavender for Mother. Again, feels a little more summery to me. Father of Autumn is Juniper. Then we get into winter. The Seed of Winter is Tobacco. Then we have Bittersweet for the 2. Bleeding Heart for the 3. 4 is the Birch. I love birch trees. 5 is the Mandrake. 6 is the Spruce. 7 is the Beech. 8 is the Lady Slipper. 9 is Belladonna. 10 is Hemlock. The Daughter of Winter is Ash. Son of Winter is Locust. Mother of Winter is Sassafras. That's what I call my friends. Father of Winter is Oak. Oh, and then I did miss the 9 of Autumn, which is Beet. So, a couple out of order there. Sorry about that. But so that's this deck. It is sort of a standard poker size, and as such should be relatively easy to shuffle. The cardstock is cardstock. It is a little stiff, I gotta say, but I'm sure that'll loosen up with time. But, shuffle's fine. Yeah, it is. I can already feel it sort of getting more pliable as I do this. So, there you have it. There's The Tarot of Plants by Heather Enders. Hope you enjoyed this. And if you've made it this far, again, if you have recommendations for, really, really balanced plant-themed oracle decks in particular, let me know, because I'm looking for some. And otherwise, have a great day.